Turns out one of the biggest mysteries that anthropologists of the 19th century, 20th century were trying to unravel was where the ancient Hebrew religious practices among the Africans came from. Seems like it's a mystery that everybody was talking about because they were trying to study the African society, specifically the Agikuyu in this case. And I think Kraft does talk about the Maasai and the Kwafi. And they were seeing these very interesting Semitic practices in the traditional religion of these people. And they could not understand where these things came from. And we are going to read a part of the book called The Bantu Beliefs and Magic by C.W Hobley. And Hobley writes, of course, about the religion of the Bantu and specifically discusses the Agikuyu and the Akamba. And this part we are going to read is the introduction of the book that was written by one Sir James George Fraser. He was a renowned anthropologist of the 19th, 20th century. And he writes this introduction for this book, and he brings up that as one of the questions that Hobley tries to answer in the book. And actually, Hobley in the book itself goes into pointing out these religious practices among the Akikuyu and the Akamba that he found to be so similar to what was happening in the ancient Hebrew religion. And he even writes down scriptures from the Bible that basically describe what he was observing among the Akikuyu and the Kamba. Where did these come from? And he provides some theories, at least two theories that he provides. And we are going to see later on in the book if C.W. Hobley does try to explain some of these theories. One of them is that it was native. Another one was that the Agikuyu, the Akamba, and other African societies were in the past conquered by Hebrew people. Something of sorts. Let's read that part of the introduction and see what he says. And this is Fraser writing the introduction of the book Bantu Beliefs and Magic. Among the mass of interesting topics dealt with in Mr. Hobley's book, it is difficult to single out any special mention in an introduction. The subjects to which on the whole he has paid closest attention are the natural religion and magic. In respect of religion, the author again and again notes the remarkable similarities which may be traced between East African and Semitic beliefs and rites, and he raises the question how these similarities are to be explained. How do we explain these similarities between Semitic groups in the Middle East religious practices and those that are found in East Africa, for example, among the Kikuyu and the Akamba? That was a big question. Are they due to parallel and independent development in the African and the Semitic races? So that's the first theory is, did these two societies just evolve independently, but it's just so happened that some of their practices are so similar? Or are they the consequence of the invention of Africa either by Semitic people or at all events by people imbued with the principles of Semitic religion? So that's the second theory, that probably these Semitic religious practices came with people who conquered Africa. It is interesting that his assumption just went into the Africans who were conquered. He did not even want to think that it's even possible that the other way happened, that maybe the religion he sees in the Middle East emerged from Africa, and those people traveled and conquered Middle East, and then that religion emerged there. In my book, Folklore in the Old Testament, I had been similarly struck by some of these resemblances, and while abstaining from speculation on their origin, had remarked that the hypothesis of derivation from the common source was not to be highly rejected. So it seems like he had written his own book and he was also going into this topic. And he says that it's possible that these religious practices among the people of East Africa and also the people in the Middle East came from the same source. To him, that seemed to make more sense than saying that they evolve independently. On the other hand, Mr. Hobley thinks it's safer in the present state of our knowledge to assume that the resemblances in question have arisen independently through parallel development in the African and Semitic areas, which is very interesting. Of course, he says that's the conclusion Hobley comes to, that these two societies just basically evolved independent of each other, but then they ended up having similar practices. He dismisses as highly improbable the idea that the ancient Semitic belief should have originated in East Africa and spread from there to Arabia. Now, this is very interesting. He now is talking about Hobley, of course, that Hobley concludes that there was no way that those religious practices left Africa and went to Arabia, that they must have come, it must be the other way around at least, or In Obley's case, of course, he says that they emerged independently. Fraser writes very interesting stuff, of course, in this introduction. But the one that stands out for me is him making it seem like it was such a huge issue in the, we could say, late 19th century, early 20th century, that these anthropologists were wondering, where did the practices, the ancient Hebrew religion or Semitic religions, the practices, where did they come from, that they were found among the people of East Africa, the Agikuyu, the Akamba? They used to practice these things. And as we read this book, because I'm reading the book and I'm going to create even more videos, we are going to see Hobley actually describe a religious practice or a spiritual event, and then go into the Bible and give you a verse that matches it, which is very interesting, because this shows you the similarities, even in sacrifice, how the Kikuyu used to do sacrifice, and then you'll go into the Bible and get you a verse that actually instructs the ancient Israelites on how to do those sacrifices. Yeah, so it's a very, very interesting stuff, and we are going to read this book, of course. It's very early on, it's just the introduction at this point. We are going now to go into the first chapters of the book, and then we'll see what Hobley writes about the beliefs and religion of the Bantu. Those are my random thoughts.